Welcome to the Vet Med Wellness and Leadership Podcast, where we discuss central challenges vet med leaders face, such as burnout, stress, and difficult interactions with clients and staff, just to name a few. In each episode, you will hear about actionable solutions that you can apply to your practice and invitations to connect with fellow leaders who are passionate about improving the wellness of the vet med profession. By subscribing, liking, commenting, or sharing this podcast, you are helping more veterinary professionals find the resources shared in these episodes. Thank you in advance for listening and supporting this show. I hope you enjoy it. Hey everybody, it's Crystal Stokes, and joining me today is Dr. Corey Blake, who earned her DVM in 2002 from Tufts School of Veterinary Medicine. She has experience in referral and emergency practice as well as ownership. And in 2012, she opened Oceanside Animal Hospital located in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Since opening the practice, Dr. Blake began investing significantly in leadership development, communications, mentorship, mindset, well-being education, and how to apply it to the team culture to boost individual satisfaction, growth, and development. Dr. Blake holds her CPC from the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching, also known as IPEC, and is a practicing certified executive leadership coach. Dr. Blake is also the founder and CEO of Sacred Leadership LLC, a consulting and coaching organization focused on empowering individuals in leadership roles personally and professionally through connecting them to their passion, emotional intelligence, embodiment, mindset, and perception awareness. So, Dr. Blake, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Well, I was hoping we could kick this off today the way I often kick the podcast off, which is hearing your full circle story.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. So I graduated from school in 2002 from Tufts, went into general practice for 2 years, and then moved into emergency and referral practice. So I worked overnights, weekends, holidays for 10 years or 8 years, and also was on the exotics referral service. So did that, which was super fun. And then realized that those hours were opposite the hours that my kids were home when my kids started to go to school. So like loving emergency medicine and having a family was kind of like how do I make that adjustment so that that works? And I decided that opening my own practice was really the way that I wanted to go. So I opened a practice, a startup in 2012, and that giving me the freedom, theoretically, to be more present for my family and to do emergency during the day. It was like the perfect mix, I thought. So I opened that in 2012. And within probably like a year or two, I started to realize, probably sooner than that, honestly, like probably within 6 months, I started to realize like, okay, there's a whole nother level to having a veterinary practice besides just being a really good DVM, like communication, leadership, team management, how all those things interact, how you be a good leader. Like it was just very eye-opening to me to be on the other side of the coin, from being managed to being the manager and the leader. And I really saw the importance in that. So I started investing right away in management and leadership training for myself and for my team. And that was definitely helpful in the veterinary space for sure, like learning how to build team. Personally, I burnt myself out like bad. So I was so invested in making this hospital grow and be successful and giving like amazing patient care and figuring out how to manage all at the same time that I became so burnt out and depressed that I was like, I don't understand why I'm even here anymore. Mm-hmm. So that for me, that was about 5 or 6 years ago. So that was a huge turning point for me to recognize that it's not all about having just the skills of like, how do you lead and how do you manage a team? How do you incorporate medicine and business together? But it's also about like where we're coming from personally and how we're showing up for ourselves in that process. And so that brought me on another journey of like figuring all of that out for myself, which was really what made the biggest difference for me. So I went from working really, really hard and like being significantly burnt out and depressed to working really, really hard and actually having fun while doing it and feeling personal joy and happiness come from it, which didn't feel like it was even possible when I started that process 5 or 6 years ago. I was ready to leave the field, like done.
Huge.
Yeah. And it's a hugely gratifying thing to be able to come into kind of your own empowerment around that and recognize that when I figure out what I need to do for me, my leadership is 10 times better than it ever was before. So the leadership part became so much easier because I was in tune with what I needed. And I could show up authentically and transparently for my team, which was very, very different than trying to hold an image of that.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of like where I kind of came from. And then I started Sacred Leadership a couple of years ago to help. Been doing some consulting work in the veterinary realm, some consulting work in realms outside of veterinary medicine. Like I work with construction firms and CEOs on marketing companies and all sorts of things in different industries, because this is so important. Like really understanding what makes ourselves tick and how we work with ourselves in leadership roles makes it 10 times easier.
Wow.
So
I love it. It's like the missing ingredient. I think people get the idea of what it is, but the how behind doing it seems a little bit mysterious. And I think that hearing your story, the question that I'm holding is, how did you bridge that gap? How did you shift from being the person who came to leadership with the idea of ownership and let's take care of this team, let's lead this company, and you're doing all the right things. You're checking the boxes, you're following the models and the templates, but you're feeling horrible while you're doing it. You're getting more and more burned out. You realize that something has to change. Can you tell us a little more about that transition for you and discovering what it was? Did you immediately have a language for it? If not, how did you develop the concept and the language around what was really missing for you?
Yeah, I think like I can tell you my personal story, like what my disconnect was. It was really very much around the like, I need to do these things. And once I do these things, I will find happiness. I will be happy. I will be joyful because I will have achieved all these things that I'm supposed to do, right? I was so focused on the, what am I supposed to do? And what's the next step? How do I get higher, right? Like I started in general practice and then I worked in referral and emergency practice, which is it's a big deal to move into that. And then I moved into practice ownership. I mean, besides getting board certified, there's not a lot of other places that you're going to go, right? Like I did all the things I was supposed to do and it wasn't working. So I think the connection point for me was realizing that what was happening is I was looking outside myself for things that were going to bring me joy and happiness and make me feel enough, right? And so when I started to kind of look internally at that, the shift that came was I can't even explain how monumental it was. It was life-changing. How I show up in the world now is completely different from how I showed up in the world 5 years ago. I feel comfortable in my own skin. I feel confident in who I am, whether or not a client likes me, whether or not one of my team members gets upset with me. I can feel balanced in who I am. And that's an incredible shift. My inner workings don't depend on my external circumstances anymore.
What a dramatic shift. And I think many people listening will very much resonate with this. You think about we go through childhood and how we move through elementary school, middle school, high school, college. A lot of our reference points are outside of ourselves. What does a coach want? What does a teacher want? What does a parent expect? How do we play the game to win and progress through life? And there's not much coaching or development given to us in our youth around how are you internally reflecting? What matters to you? Did this have purpose for you? Did this have meaning for you? What about your sense of integrity? Did that feel right to you? we don't often take the time to ask those questions. And I think especially for professionals that choose paths that are very challenging and busy, such as veterinary medicine, it almost becomes a luxury to check in with ourselves, to say, hey, let's take that time to ask those questions. But you're proposing that this is not a luxury. This is actually critical and foundational to leadership and to being able to lead effectively and sustainably and with a sense of joy in doing it, which is like, wouldn't we all love that whipped cream on top, which doesn't have to be whipped cream, I think is part of your story. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. Like we become a victim to the pace of the hospital, right? And our responsibility. So we start to hold all of that within ourselves of like, I have to be perfect. I can't make a mistake. I need to be on time. I can't let this client wait. I have to make sure the patient gets all the care it needs and that my entire team does all the things that they're supposed to do. And you can feel that energy starting to build, that anxiety, that like, that doesn't feel good. And we don't stay connected to our reason for doing what we're doing, right? Like, our why, what's our mission? Like, and so that's something that I built into my practice on a regular basis is we regularly connect with our why. Like, what's our purpose here? Who did we help today? What was the impact we had on those clients and those patients? So we start to stay connected to the difference that we're making so that even when it is hard, we're connected to that positivity. And then we also look at things like our own self-image, right? So if you walk around most anywhere, a veterinary hospital is just one example, but if you walk around and you talk to people, you hear people complaining about themselves or others, like complaining about their circumstances. You hear them self-deprecating, right? So like all the things of like, I'm so stupid, I screwed that up, or like little things like that. Those words matter. They matter tremendously. And so we can shift the way our energy is in a room or in a situation just by changing the way we talk to ourselves and to others. And so we work a lot at our hospital on honestly doing something that we call clean bragging. So we literally ask people for brags. Like, what are you proud of? What did you do today that made you feel good? Like you are aligned with the things that mean the most to you. Give me a brag. And then we upride one another. We celebrate each other for that. Like, how often do you get to go around in the world and be like, oh, I did it today? Like, that's just not a thing, right? So
Fabulous.
those are just small examples of the things that we do, but we have at least a dozen practices that we do at our hospital that are similar to that help us be connected in that way.
Oh, it's fabulous. I want to point to something that when I learned this, it was really eye-opening for me. The research around gratitude practices. So we've heard for a long time how important it is to practice gratitude, to actively think, oh, I'm grateful for this important work. I'm grateful for that interaction with that client. I'm grateful that I have a roof over my head. And that's something we've all heard many times. The research that's come out has shown that it's just as, if not more important, to receive gratitude and really let it land. So when a client says, I appreciate you so much for what you've done today, or your coworker appreciates you for stepping in and lending that hand or covering something for them, I notice there's this tendency for us to just shrug it off, to kind of take that gift and toss it to the side. Like, no, it's nothing. Or, again, with the self-deprecation, but taking that moment to let it land. And it sounds like you have a process in your hospital, in your practice, where people are getting more and more comfortable, more exposure to receiving positive feedback and receiving gratitude from each other, as well as giving themselves gratitude for something they've done well.
Right. Yeah. We even take it one step further, which it's actually really challenging for people to do this. But when we give each other a compliment on the team, our response is, thank you. It's true. So it's not just like, oh yeah, thanks. It's like, thank you. Yeah, that is true. Like, yeah, I did do a good job on that case.
Yes.
Or yeah, I did connect with that owner in a really positive way. It gives us an opportunity to own it instead of deflecting it.
This is so great. What I say with my clients is something similar, which is I just ask them, is this accurate? And just ask yourself, is what was just given to me accurate? Not too, overly complimentary, not too little, but it really hits the sweet spot of, I think that's actually an accurate assessment of whatever, attribute they were commenting on. It's really it's a powerful process and not to be understated. I think it's great that you're bringing that into your practice. And I wanted to kind of focus in a bit on something that is unique about what you bring to the leadership space. We have not really talked about this much on the podcast today. And this is what one of the messages I wanted to make sure we brought home is really around this mind-body connection and an experience of embodiment. I think can be a bit mysterious. And I'm wondering if you can tie it into how you were originally kind of coming home to yourself in that full circle story. Can you start there?
Yeah, absolutely. So as doctors, we're pretty heady, right? Like we're pretty intellectual.
I think so.
And I think, generally speaking, most of the population, regardless of what your profession is, that's what the value is. That's what we're taught in our society, that our brains are our value, right? And so we learn from a really early age that that's what we want to focus on, like what we can achieve, how we can get there, how we can think critically. And we start to disregard the rest of our existence. And what happens with that is that we end up being in a state of perpetual fight or flight. So you actually look at the mind starts to manipulate situations and change perceptions based on your experiences in the past or the stories that you're telling yourself. And so it starts to run away with things, and we end up staying in a sympathetic state. And so if you look at, so there's fight or flight, and then there's also fight, flight, or freeze, right? There's also polyvagal theory, which talks about this a lot, which this is Deb Dana's work. And she basically talks about the vagus nerve being part of the parasympathetic system, right? But we traditionally always thought about it as like you have a resting state and you have a fight or flight state. And so the work that she's done has shown is that it's not just two states. Mm-hmm. We have our kind of balanced state that it's just different. So there's actually three states, one being a ventral vagal state, where it's basically the place where you're in ease, where you can have pleasure, you can be playful, you could have that joy and engagement in what you're doing. Then there's your sympathetic response, which is your fight or flight response. But what happens when people are in fight or flight for so long, chronically, and this happens a lot in the veterinary industry, right? Like we come in, our day is busy, we go home, we come in, our day is busy, we go home. We're chronically in fight or flight. And it actually becomes depleting for our nervous system. Mm-hmm. And the way our body has of coping is of going into this dorsal vagal situation, which is a place of burnout and depression, where basically our body is numbing out, it's shutting down because it's a lower energy state. And the body just doesn't have the resources anymore to kind of continue to stay in that sympathetic on a long-term basis. Mm-hmm. And so what I found as I was learning and growing and kind of navigating these waters over the last few years is that when we actually learn to connect to our body, what our body needs, and the messages that our body has, mm-hmm. as well as our emotional energetics, which would mean like, are we angry? Are we frustrated? What's going on with that, right? When we learn to connect to that, it actually drops us into a space where we can bio-align with what we need and bring ourselves back up into this ventral vagal state. So we're basically pouring into our tank, listening to the messages that are there and using them. Because there's an intelligence in the body that we just don't even conceptualize, right? Like most people don't recognize that they're chronically anxious or chronically in fight or flight because it's the state that they're always in. Mm-hmm. So until you pull them out of it, for even 10 minutes, they don't recognize how stressed out they were, mm-hmm. right? They stuck in their heads. And so it can be hard for us to get in touch with what's going on in our body, but simply stopping to pay attention to how am I breathing right now, right? Like how deep is my breath? The other thing we work with a lot of the time is recognizing your yes and your no based on your body response. So what I mean by that is that if you are, let's say you are asked to do something let's say you're asked to do a surgery that you haven't done before, but you've been shown how to do it, you've assisted on it, but you haven't done it yourself, right? So let's say your boss comes up to you and says, I had this surgery. Do you want to do it? And you have a choice in that moment to say yes, because you want to please your boss, yes, because you want to grow, or yes, because it's actually your yes. Or you have a choice to say, no, that's not what I want to do, or I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it this way. And how the question really is, how do we know, right? Like, how do we know how to answer in that moment? And so often we get stuck in our heads, but if we drop into our body around it, you can actually consciously start to feel into what is going to happen if I do this. Like, okay, so let's look at this question, right? Like, if I say yes to doing this surgery, how does it feel physically in my body? And we have yeses and nos. Typically, nos feel like a contraction or a heaviness or a sinking or a tightness in our stomach. A yes is more of an expansion, okay? Like you can even watch your body language. It shifts. Yeah. And there's usually some sort of lightness in it, whether it's like color or feeling, it just feels more expansive, right? Mm-hmm. So when we start to be in touch with our body's answer, the body doesn't lie. It doesn't manipulate things. Our body has wisdom within it. And so when we pay attention to that, we are actually listening to our deepest truth. Mm-hmm. And so when we align with that, we get to answer in a way that is true for us. And the reason that's important is because if we answer from a place of wanting to please someone else or thinking it's something that we should be doing, what's going to happen is we're going to end up resenting it, or something's going to go wrong and we're going to be pissed off and we're going to blame somebody else because it wasn't aligned with what we wanted. Mm-hmm. So that's just one example of how we can decrease our stress load by tapping into the body, because we don't have to hash through well, what if this, what if that, or I should do this because they think this. We don't have to go through all of those iterations in our mind. If we start to learn to trust our body, the stress level goes away because we know the body has the answer.
It takes me back so much because I remember when I was going through my own process of this, and it was a very similar story to yours of being very heady and really trusting my mind and my logic to make decisions, and then getting extremely burned out and finding things like yoga and therapy that were modalities of trying to slow down and have other centers of knowledge. So feeling my heart center or feeling my body, and just noticing how I would say to listeners, at least for me in my experience and what I've noticed with clients that I've worked with through time, is that you have to be patient with yourself, because sometimes it's I reminded myself, I've always known this language. It's always been there since I was a tiny baby, but I've forgotten how to speak it because I haven't practiced it all in 20 some years or however long it had been. And so reconnecting that language and being able to trust the message that I'm getting, it really took me a lot of time. At first I'd be skeptical, like my body's saying to do this, or my heart feels this way. And my head is like, no, I don't agree. And so it took a while for those connections to form and for me to trust in that signal. Do you have any recommendations for that when you're working with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing that gets like kind of confusing is like what's talking? Is it my truth or is it fear? Like which one, right? And so what I have experienced and what I was told by a mentor of mine is that our body's answer, it comes fast and it's quiet. So it's like a whisper. Mm-hmm. And fear comes in strong right afterwards and is loud and it's not going to shut up. So if you can start to notice your first initial, it's that whole gut instinct thing. It's real. So you notice your first initial response. Mm-hmm. That's the one to trust. Wonderful. So the other thing that you can look at is, okay, so how do you know what's an edge, right? So like comfort, we all have our comfort zone. And so if we're in our comfort zone, change feels scary, right? And sometimes too much change takes us too far outside our comfort zone and it feels unsafe. So a lot of times people are trying to figure out like, is this a growth edge that I want to lean into versus is this a no for me? Like, how do I tell whether it's an edge that's important for me to learn and grow or whether I need to hold my no? Because so often we just hold the no because we're scared. So how do we tell the difference? And generally the difference is that when we have a no, our body's going to feel that contraction. We're going to kind of shut down a little bit and we're going to kind of feel like we want to put our hands up like this. Okay. But if it's a growth edge, you're going to probably have some level of anxiety there, but there's also going to be excitement.
Yeah.
So if there's fear, fine. If there's a solid no, fine. But if you have a combination of fear and excitement, that's your growth edge because it's something that your body and your psyche together are being like, you know what, I'm terrified of this, but I really want to do it because I know it's important to me and it's going to drive me, right? Like I'm excited about this and I'm terrified.
Love it. I love that you brought this thing because I was actually pinning it in my mind for later in our discussion, but since we're having it now, I wanted to bring this in about anxiety. So I specialize in working with anxiety, and it's such a challenging emotion, as well as in some spectrums a disorder to work with because it can really mask a person's ability to grow. It can be extremely paralyzing and confusing and a very loud messenger. Like you said, that fear can come up strong and loud. And I think that advice of pausing and really asking if this is a growth edge is important because we don't want to get stuck in a narrow, tiny box of it has to be a hell yes or it's a no. Because then our world becomes very limited if we only do things that we're 100% confident about and we're only 100% sure. We don't grow, we don't expand. It's not even that interesting. It gets boring. So I think that word excitement is nice. It's sort of like you have an appetite for something and we all inherently want to grow and learn. And that can be a great way to start conquering anxiety, which is just going forward, even though you're still scared. The fear is still there, but you're going to try it anyway.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think we're seeing more and more and more of in veterinary medicine because, you know, especially when we talk about how litigious our society is, right? Like nobody wants to make a mistake. And so it's becoming very different now compared to how it was years ago, where a lot of doctors are just, they want to stay in their comfort zone because that's what they know and they feel safe there. But it also becomes boring at some point in time, right? So it's like, how do I both grow in a way that is going to be supportive for me? And I think so often we get stuck in the black or white of it. Like you can grow with support. And so you can lean into that anxious place, that fear and excitement place, and ask for the support that you need so that you feel empowered to be successful at it. You don't have to leap off the deep end of the swimming pool. You can jump on a floaty and float to the shallow end.
Perfect. Yes. It's like the example you're giving with if you were asked, would you like to do this surgery? The one that you've witnessed, you've assisted, but you haven't performed. And your floaty wing version could be to say, yes, but to do so, I'd like this form of support. Can you be there with me? Can you be my assist? And if I get overwhelmed, can you step in? There you go.
Mm-hmm. So it's how do we work with the anxiety in a way that isn't paralyzing us? Because there is, like, you know this, Crystal, like there is productive anxiety and there's unproductive anxiety, right? So like it's important. It's an important thing. It's an important function of our nervous system and our body that we get anxious in places where we don't feel 100% safe. But the question is, when's it serving us and when is it in our way?
Yeah.
So the more we can discern that, the more grounded we be and the happier we are, more grounded we can be. Yeah.
I love that you brought that in because it's true. I think a lot of people, we want to get rid of any negative emotions. Like we should have zero negative emotions, no anger, no fear, no sadness ever. And it's like, no, absolutely not. They are welcome to be a part of our life, just like any other emotion. And we can continue to move through life even while experiencing that emotion. And anxiety can definitely be motivating at times. So it exists for a reason, and it's not to be banished. It's to be worked with. I think you said it perfectly. I wanted to also bring this back home when I love that you're painting pictures of how this shows up in veterinary medicine. Another example I wondered if we could touch on would be a very difficult situation, such as facing a challenging euthanasia. And what I see a lot in clinics, and I experienced this myself, especially when I worked overnight ER, was there was almost like a subtle message that we don't have time to grieve or feel anything. Get in there, do your job, and then get on to the next thing. And it was really kind of inhumane, I think, to experience the level of like economic euthanasia and not having the time to really process it, or just a very emotional euthanasia with a family present and maybe a pet that we've known for a long time, and we're like saying goodbye to somebody we knew. There's a whole lot around euthanasia. I wonder if you could speak to how embodiment can really help us work through these more emotional moments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's a concept that I hope is starting to shift, because it's so vital that we actually pay attention to that. So embodiment is not just about feeling the body, it's also feeling the energy. But by energy, I mean emotion, right? So like we have energetic charge, whether that is anger or sadness. And so when we feel sadness in a euthanasia, and people are going to disagree with me on this, but it is absolutely okay to shed a tear in front of a client. Mm-hmm. What's not okay is that when we get so emotional in that moment with the client that we take away from that experience. So if we're shedding a tear in front of a client and saying, I'm so sorry for your loss, and they're seeing the grief on our face, that is supportive for them. And it's supportive for us. And if we're allowed, when we walk out of that room, to say, I need 5 minutes, or for your teammates to say, hey, that looked like that was really rough. Why don't you go take 5 minutes and step outside or play with this puppy or go take a breath? Mm-hmm. That's mutually supportive. And it's not even like we have to stop numbing ourselves to our emotions. It is vital. And that goes for any of it. But grief in this industry is like, it's a huge piece that we're ignoring. And the more that we can actually allow ourselves to feel it. So science is crazy. So studies have shown that if you feel an emotion for 90 seconds, it will shift by itself.
It does, yes.
And so we have been basically bottling up our emotions our entire careers.
Yes. So when I picture this, when I always talk to clients, it's every emotion has like a half-life. It starts low, it peaks, and if you allow it, it falls. But most of us, what we do is as it starts to peak, we put a little dam up and we stop it from dropping. So the emotion, whether it's sadness or grief or anger or anxiety, we perpetuate it being high by revisiting it in our head and not allowing ourselves to just process it and let it drop. You know, we don't have a system for letting it complete the cycle.
Yeah. And it actually becomes a somatic trauma if it's like repeatedly happening, right? So the body actually holds that grief inside it, and it can actually lead to medical conditions. The science of somatics is actually pretty cool. There's a lot of data to support it. And one of the things that we can do as a practical notion around emotion is to actually physically give our body a voice. So like when we are having an energetic like response, when we're having grief, when we're having anger, like our body wants to do something, and there's a reason why our body wants to do something. So there's charge there because it needs to get something out. If we don't get it out and we store it, it's going to turn toxic for us. And so all we need to do is create space for ourselves, whether it's 5 minutes, to actually give our body a voice. So like sometimes when you're really angry about something, it feels really good to like hit a pillow or like stomp your foot on the floor. It's okay to do that in a room that is not with a client and like without your team, right? Like step into the bathroom, have yourself a little tantrum with your arms and your legs, get your body's energy out. Because if you don't do that, it's going to stay inside you and it's going to turn sour. And then it's going to come up in every conversation that you have. You're so pissed off.
Right.
So
Oh, yes. Well, for those people listening today that are the people that love concrete things that they can try themselves, do you have some practices that you like to recommend for newbies? They're beginners at this. They're thinking, okay, I get it. I have a mind. It likes to take over a lot. That's definitely me. I relate to it. I'd like to feel a bit more embodied. I'd like to start testing out, checking with my body and just feeling things. Can you give us a couple of practices that they could start with today?
Yeah. So, ways to kind of notice whether you're tense or anxious or not. Like you can start with practices where you are clenching, like start by clenching your arm. Okay. And so all you have to do is then slowly start to relax your shoulder, keep your fist clenched, relax whatever this part of your arm is, the humerus. Just slowly relax your forearm, keeping your fist clenched, and start to notice like what's the difference here versus here. Mm-hmm. So you'll start to notice the tension in your body. And as you relax, you can feel the blood flow more readily, right? So doing exercises like that, where you're starting to pay attention to tension and release, tension and release. So that's one big thing. Mindset work is really vital, and it's really easy to start playing with bragging, reframing, asking people to reframe stuff when they say like, I suck at this. Like, how true is that? Let's hear something different. Like that's not only supportive for you and your energy, because every time we hear someone knock themselves down, it knocks us down too. It's also supportive for them. So that's one very quick and easy thing that you can do. But really, I would really encourage people to get really close and quiet whenever they can and start playing with what they like and what they don't like. And what I mean by that is, okay, have you ever seen Julia Roberts in, what's the movie where she was like a stripper and she ended up,
Pretty Woman?
Yes, Pretty Woman. Okay. So in Pretty Woman, she is she's got like eggs in front of her and she's never made eggs for her before. And I think it's Pretty Woman. It's a movie with Julia Roberts. I'm not exactly sure, but she's got eggs in front of her and she's like, I don't know what kind of eggs I like, because I've always just gone with whatever anyone else wanted. I would just order that. And so what we can do is we can start to do research on ourselves of what it is that we actually like. What is it that brings us joy and happiness? And start to pay attention to that. And you can start by doing that yes, no thing with yourself. Just close your eyes and be like, do I want green beans for dinner or do I want hot dogs for dinner? And feel it in your body. Like, yes. What's my yes and what's my no? It's very simple. But it actually is going to get you more in touch with the sensations in your body, which is going to get you more in touch with your emotions. And then you're going to kind of stepwise go from there. There's like 1,000 things like that I could share, but
I love this so much. In this topic, it really does deserve a much longer episode. Embodiment it takes a while to explain. And I think doing, an episode that starts with just an introduction of what is embodiment, just to start having a language for it, and then getting into more introductory practices, and then more advanced practices. It's really a lifelong journey of being connected. And I think that you've done a beautiful job today of introducing it in the context of veterinary medicine and how to recognize, the kind of disembodied self that's just very heady and often very anxious, and the point of reference being outside of ourselves, and then bringing it back home to a more balanced perspective. And I'd love to just ask you, as an expert in embodiment and in leadership practices in veterinary medicine, if you have any core takeaways that you want listeners to really leave here today with, first and foremost in their mind.
Yeah. The biggest thing I could say is that it's very easy to get to that place of burnout and think that you just can't do it any longer, because thought of going back in and continuing to do it is just like demoralizing. Knowing that it's not about the career you chose, it's not about the work that you're doing, it's about how we're approaching it is something that for me shifted. Like I thought so much that I picked the wrong career. I couldn't do this anymore. But being able to get back in touch with what I needed and what was true for me and what brings me joy rekindled everything. And it's not the career that we chose. It's how we're approaching our lives from a place of perfectionism and like striving to be the best and external recognition. Like we've got to shift our mindset into what fuels us and brings us joy and pleasure and happiness, because that's going to follow us wherever we go. So if we're thinking about moving to another career, how we approach our work is going to be the same no matter what career we're in, no matter what environment we're in. And so if we're able to reconnect to who we are first, I would say this, like if you're thinking about, is veterinary medicine for me or not? Connect with yourself first. Mm-hmm. Connect with what brings you joy first while you're still here in this field. Really dedicate yourself to that, because once you do that, when you're aligned with who you are, you get to start to see whether you have joy in it or not. Like I got to the place where like when I saw dogs outside of work, I'd be like, no, don't even want to look at them. And now I get to play with puppies on the street and it's all exciting. And I don't mind talking to people about their animals. Like it's a whole different world. So, but if you get to the place where you're like, I am so aligned, I know exactly what I want. I am on fire personally. I know how to keep myself lit. And you're like, veterinary medicine isn't lighting me up, then by all means shift. But you've got to be lit from within first before you make that decision.
So well said. That is a beautiful point to make. And I think it really ties this all together nicely of how important it is to listen to yourself and know yourself and make decisions from that point. No. So Dr. Blake, for today, if people want to find out more about you, where are the best places for them to catch up with you?
So the best way to reach me is to email me. So my email is corey.blake@sacredleadership.net. And you can find me at Oceanside Animal Hospital when I'm there, or sacredleadership.net is my one-on-one coaching site for women that I work with on embodiment. But if you're looking for like leadership coaching or work for your teams, or how do I get into a better space for myself and how I am as a leader, shoot me an email. It's the best way to reach me.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for being on today. I'll link all that up in the show notes so people don't have to hunt for it. And it's just been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I'm so grateful that you invited me to be on this podcast with you. I really enjoyed our time together.
Me too. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you feel stoked after listening to this episode. And as always, I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Is there a topic that you want to know more about? Please let me know. And thank you again for subscribing and sharing your favorite episodes with others. It really means a lot.